right?
Thank you, everybody. Welcome to this fireside chat. It's the end of the conference here, so I think we're excited that it's this intimate crew. I'm going to save enough time at the end for you guys to ask questions. Would love to make this, and feel free to shout out in the middle too. I want to
Yeah.
make this an interactive session.
Yeah.
Edwin's going to say some wild and crazy things, and so if you want to react, feel free.
Yeah, thanks. Day 3 of this conference. It's awesome that there's people out here, so we're appreciative. It's awesome. I was here last year. I know what it's
And
like.
you went to the beach the third day?
Oh yeah, right. That we joked about doing it out there. That would have been great.
So I'm Allison. I'm the co-founder of Tubular. Tubular is see a lot of customers out there in the audience as well. So for those of you who don't know, Tubular is the only measurement and analytics platform that really moves at the scale and speed of social video. And so for us, we were extremely excited to work with Edwin and BuzzFeed, because if there's any company that defines the scale and speed of social video, I think it's you guys. In 2017, you were #1 on the Tubular leaderboards, 11 out of 12 months. And you can, for those of you who don't know the Tubular leaderboards, so BuzzFeed there got in December 4.3 billion views on Facebook, 700 million views on YouTube, 300 million on Instagram and other platforms. So that's a pretty impressive amount of views. And when you look at the company that they're with, obviously the major new media and broadcast and traditional media companies out there. Sorry. So I'm going to ask you some questions.
Yeah,
We're going to have
start.
a casual orchid
side
chat.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about you. Tell us more about your career, how you ended up where you are today, and what you do at BuzzFeed.
Well, I always joke that my path to this place started in a really wonky way. I was on my way to get my PhD, hopefully in organizational psychology, and there were, back in my day, my first single was Lady in Red, and it was a cassette. That I already told you. Audra was joking. She was like, "What was the first CD you bought?" I'm like, "CD? I remember cassettes." Was in Nebraska or Illinois, and my wife said, "If you decide to go do that program, you're going by yourself." Obviously wasn't my wife back then, and so I decided to choose love instead of career. And so while most of my buddies, they ended up working for the Big Six or going to med school or law school, I worked at J. Crew, and I was a paralegal in the morning and a secretary, and basically, 9 months in, I was hanging out with my buddies, and they were like, "Oh, what are you up to these days?" I'm like, "I'm selling you Glen Plaid shirts, and if you buy shoes, I get $20 off of commission." And I realized that, 9 months in, one of my mentors were like, "Oh, you'd probably do pretty well doing this thing called market research. It's a mix of understanding people and doing what you do when it comes to psychology and business." And so I started off doing a really small startup called Hall & Partners before Omnicom came in and bought them out. I was working with their LA office as one of their first junior employees. And one of the coolest things is when you work at a startup, you go from being in the alleyway loading the soda machine and the paper and answering phones to closing our first global multi-million-dollar copy test deal and staying up till 4 in the morning trying to go, how are we going to fill this? We don't even know how to do this. And one of the cool things is being there for a little bit of time. They trusted me with all the new business, and so I hung out and did work in the early 2000s with eBay and Yahoo when they were on their rise, and Yahoo took a liking to me and gave me a shot, and so I spent 10 years there. In the middle, I took a little break. I was always in love with video, and so I went to a startup that didn't start so well. Fun fact, don't ever join a startup with a 9-month-old. When it folds, your wife gets really mad at you because you don't have health care. And then after 10 years at Yahoo, I got to hang out at Pinterest for a little bit of time and been at BuzzFeed since. And so the journey's been really fun, and I think one of the things that has shaped me the most is I'm constantly learning, constantly.
And tell us some of the top things you've learned at BuzzFeed. What have been your top insights? Or also brag a little bit about BuzzFeed. You're wearing the tube socks.
Oh, that's right. My BuzzFeed Red Sox.
And tell us a bit about the scale of BuzzFeed, and tell us about some of the insights you've sort of learned along the way.
Well, I told Allison that I was going to tell her how we met each other, and one of your account execs wrote me and said, "Oh, we have an award for you. You won this award from Tubular." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And so I always joke that the best thing to appeal to someone's ego is to tell them they want an award, whatever that award was. And so when the first time we met, they were telling us what they ended up doing. This award was really cool. It was in a card.
Yeah, stay tuned. Video Aces is happening again in next week, and you won again. So
that's awesome. And you made me take a picture. I'm like, I don't know where this picture's going, but all right. But I think one of the awesome things is as I started to dig into the actual tool, the one thing when I started at BuzzFeed, and this happened pretty much early on, is I wanted to start to establish ourselves as a force. And you need context to actually do that. And so when we started to see this leaderboard, it surprised even me at the scale of who we were competing with. I mean, the company we're keeping there, whether it's Disney or Comcast or Time Warner, it's a pretty awesome company to keep. And so as I started to dig in there, I realized that we had something super special, whether it was our Tasty franchise or what we do on BuzzFeed. And so it's been a remarkable journey because that sort of context allows you to go out and really talk about the fact that, BuzzFeed, which if you talk to Jonah, literally started in Chinatown. They were next to some little restaurant, and he would joke about how it started in a room with a mahjong parlor at night, and they were seriously just interested 10 years ago, 11 years ago, in creating content like cat videos that we all share and laugh about, and giving the working person a break. That was like his end goal, to saying, we play in the video space, a space that everyone wants to get into, and we're not doing it in a small way, but in a really compelling, interesting way. And so even being able to, I sit really close to him, be inspired by how he talks, or inspired by the creators that we have, that's been a really fun journey. It's been a human journey, and it makes being there really awesome.
And then one of the stats that you were telling me this morning is that Tasty is, 35% of all video views on all food
related
video views on Facebook.
Yeah, I mean it was astounding. I mean, obviously in the streams of billions, but if you take a look at just Tasty itself as an entire property, it's about 30% to 32% in any given month. And then if you add Goodful, which we have tons of food content as well, you literally can say, oh, if you think about the billions of streams, and we all, if we're on Facebook, probably have seen a recipe video or follow some food, because food is such a common language for all of us. To say that we own 35% of those views and talk about it with advertisers or even just the people, it becomes a pretty awesome fact in and of itself.
Did you learn that through Tubular?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That's right.
That's cool. Tell us a bit about how research and insights works at BuzzFeed and your connection to data-driven or data-informed content, your connection to ad sales. Like, tell us how all the pieces fit together to sort of how BuzzFeed thinks about data and uses data.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that is so fun about BuzzFeed is how experimental we actually all are, and so. But that experiment is backed and verified by data. We were even talking, if you talk to Ashley McCollum, who's the GM at Tasty, she'll tell you that it literally started as an experiment. Basically, one of our chief content person, Zay Frank, he's one of those guys that if you hang out at a dinner party, you want to sit next to him. He'll teach you about Scotch one moment, and then he'll talk about the philosophy of why we exist and the meaning of life, and you end up leaving that conversation a better person. He literally had creators go out and experiment. And literally, they just did a number of videos, and they looked at the data to see what would stick. And so one of the creators ended up taking a tomato, and that over-the-top shot that is now really famous, just cutting the tomato. And there was something methodical and something that you really wanted to just keep watching. And we would see this spike, and all of a sudden, he was like, that's it. That's a format, that there's something there. And so they just went in that vein and started to leverage the data in that way, because it became the signal of a gut feel. And one of the things we always joke about is we all probably check our mobile devices in the middle of the night, and if you decided to have sound on, my wife would knock me in the head and say, what's going on with you? And so he decided, how would I translate video, especially mobile video, in this post-literate world, in a place that I'm checking my device at 2 a.m. in the morning, and how do you make it actually communicate something with this format? And so that was really the way he started to build what was actually known as this amazing brand, Tasty, and really take it a step further. And so to answer your question, one of the things that is really great about how we leverage data is it's really a verifier of the signals that is really human consumption. And so we use it to test our hypotheses. We also use a lot of the tools that we have to do things better. And so I was joking with you, but this is true. One of the flexibilities of using your platform is I literally can look at the leaderboard and say, this is a really great tool for me because I can talk about our scale versus some of the best media companies out there and be in great company. But if I wanted to get granular and look at cupcakes versus bundt cakes, something as granular as that, I literally can look at the way you guys tag the metadata and say, this is who's doing bundt cake recipes right now. And there's an opportunity or there isn't. And so that sort of opportunity doesn't present itself often. And so if you're leveraging the tool right, it doesn't just help you talk about yourself in the marketplace, but it really can help with your content creation in a lot of ways.
Who is creating bundt cakes right now? I want to know. You're making me hungry.
Yeah, we should go look at it.
What if you were to give advice to this room and say, hey, you know, I've talked to a lot of people over the years who have said, you know, we're trying to like, you know, BuzzFeedify ourselves, or what are a few tangible pieces of advice that people can take back to their whether it's their research teams or whether it's their advice to their internal business partners in programming or in sales? What's like, you know, hey, I learned how to BuzzFeedify myself. This is what you do.
I think one thing that I'm loving about being at BuzzFeed is it's not about the digital platforms or the distribution that makes all the difference. What it comes down to is the human connection aspect of it. A lot of the content that gets created should make a consumer say, that is so me, or that's so us. And that ultimately propels the propensity to share and connect and engage around that content. And as a researcher, what gets so sexy is it's not about the measurement as much as it is about the human connection part of it. And so when we talk about BuzzFeedifying anything, it's not even a thing. What it is let's just understand each other and our own consumption habits and why we're doing the things that we do and bring that back to the business to make them better. And I'm lucky because I have an opportunity to do it in an environment that allows for creative experimentation. And so what ends up happening for me is that benefit to also experiment and have some things work out really well, like our relationship, my relationship with other strategic partners, and then even learn from mistakes when things don't work as well.
Tell us a bit about like your tech stack, or what are the research tools, softwares that you guys employ, whether it's home builds or whether it's external partners to do what you do?
Yeah, I think for our competitive intelligence and competitive rankers type things, we use all the things that we all use in this room. We're definitely a big proponent, obviously, of Nielsen DCR, because what's the most important to us is we're stepping into a space now where if about 75 to 80% of what we do is not in our homegrown sort of applications or site experiences, we need to understand that social footprint that extends beyond what we do on our own. Quantcast, we still think Comscore is an important place just to understand a lot of what, how we're faring and what they're up to. And even from a internal perspective, there's a whole nother group that's just way smarter than myself that literally hacks into the APIs that are available to us, whether it's through Facebook or Snap, and really takes that data and teaches us things about our audience based on what's happening on those platforms. And that stuff is always things that we do that's homegrown internally.
Great. And then because I'm Tubular, and I'm also just curious, Like, what are the jobs that Tubular helps you do? How does Tubular play into, how does Tubular complement sort of the traditional partners that you work with, and what's its role in your stack?
I think for us, in a lot of ways, it helps to teach us how to talk about ourselves in the marketplace. I mean, this whole concept of scale and the fact that we have it, we can actually leverage your tool in a pretty significant way. One of the things that has also been really fun is tech debt is something that we all struggle with, right? I mean, getting your IT and folks, your tech leaders to work with you on measurement and selling that person on the value is something we all struggle with. I think that what you guys end up providing is consistent measurement based on, hey, when you reach a certain threshold on YouTube or Facebook or Snap or whatever you're measuring, we will start to measure this. So that sort of consistency allows you to have relative context of where you sit. And for all measurement tools, whether we like them or not, there are really good things and things that we'd like to see happen better. It is consistently great for all of us and also consistently things that we need to improve for all of us. And so that sort of consistency allows for that relative context. And so when you go out there, you can actually say, well, this is what this number teaches me about where we place ourselves in the marketplace. From a competitive white space opportunity perspective, obviously that bundt cake, cupcake example was a real example because we want to know who's doing things right on YouTube or Facebook. And when we can identify some of those things, it becomes a really good opportunity for us to say, this is where we're going to make more content. And one of the ways that we actually use you is if you take a look at just like the parent pages of Tasty and one of our respected competitors, Tastemade, there's literally a 1% overlap of people who view that content or the views on our page of Tasty versus Tastemade. And for Tastemade, there's a 20% overlap of their views versus our page views. And what that represents to me is we're constantly in the marketplace telling each other's story and saying we beat out our competitors. But if there's very little overlap, what it suggests to marketers and to advertisers is there's plenty of opportunity for us to play in the space together. And really these views don't overlap at all. And so what are you as a marketer going to do to really up-level yourself? Where's the biggest opportunity? Who has the scale? And so for us, it's really telling those stories and being able to arm our sales folks with that and to even learn a little bit about that. We're not going to win in every case. One of the things is our Nifty brand is amazing, but because the creators need to come up with really hard concepts to hack things and make it great, sometimes we don't win that leaderboard at all. But what we notice is that 30% or the typical average video gets 30% the number of views. And the story we drive home there is we've got an engagement lead there. And so it really comes down to how you think about telling that story because the data ultimately exists. And we leverage several of our measurement tools to really think about those compelling stories and say, this is how we want to position that because it's true.
And we had some interesting conversations around sort of the meaning of research and the meaning of insights and the direction that the industry is going.
Yeah.
What's your take? What's your take on research and insights and the impact of digital and the movement?
There was a really awesome Harvard Business Review article that just came out probably 3 days ago. Oh no, it was about data strategists.
Yep.
And how data storytellers and there are new roles that are actually being created that separate the data scientists and programmers from the business people. And those people will be the bridge because they understand data just enough to be able to say, this is what is so important about that data that you just saw. And then you've got the coders and the data scientists sitting in that other space. And so, as we were talking, one of the things that I love is since BuzzFeed is a pretty cool brand, we get a lot of younger kids that want to work there. And it's so sad that I'm saying younger kids. That just shows I'm old. But I'm finding that the profile and talking to these kids, they're amazing. They're amazing, and the sort of hard skills that they come out with, so much more advanced than what I came out with. Like it's so funny that when I was younger, and you do a copy test with 200 people, that's big data. And now, marketers are saying, give me that qualitative data with a 3,000 person sample, right? And I think right now we're in that interesting adolescent period where we're still going to have the data scientists and the coders be on one side of the room and the marketers on the other side, or even the folks that grew up in the market research space on one side, or linear. And that as we see this space, I would say that it's still separate. And so the storytellers versus the data extraction piece feels very separate to me right now. But I would say that in the next 10 to 15 years, that gap's going to close very quickly. And I'm already seeing that sort of inspiring young, really go-getter sort of employee that will take up that gap. And they will bring something new to this, to what we do. And it's exciting to actually watch that happen.
Interesting. Any questions from the audience? I have a lot more questions, but I do want to turn it over to you guys if you have questions as well.
Just looking at some of your numbers, obviously you guys are very weighted on Facebook.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the recent algorithm changes and how that's changed your strategy maybe, and the fact that you're not going to get a free ride on Facebook anymore as a media company?
Well, one of the things that we met with Facebook at CES, and I loved their messaging because they said that we're going to focus on meaning and meaningful connections. And when you're creating content that is about us, meaning is at the heart of what we do. One thing that we can see within the data set is if you look at your day 3, day 10, or day 30 views, for all of us in this room, about 60% of the views end up happening in the first 3 days. We're 6 times larger regardless of the time period. But what we're actually finding is that even at day 30, we have some of the strongest view counts that still are happening for any given video. And what that actually ultimately indicates to me is that the sort of organic value that is derived from our content means that it's engaging, it's something people want to get around, and it's something that they share. In fact, just with our Tasty sort of content, we started to look at some interesting analyses that is all around the @ symbol. So if I see something pretty cool, like a Diageo post around how we're going to have mixed drinks in the Super Bowl, I might @ Allison. And I think that what's really great about that is there's been a 3x increase in those kinds of shares. And what it suggests to me is that we're starting to leverage content in a meaningful way to have disparate, disjointed, yet connected conversations with one another in a very intimate way, but is completely public because I'm adding Allison. And with the changes in the algorithm, while all of us in this room might question what that means for our business, I'm inspired by what Jonah said, which is let's not worry about the changes and let's keep making content that people want. And ultimately what ends up happening is we feel like we're going to be in a great position because if you keep making that sort of content, the algorithm's not going to be able to stop meaning. And if we can actually create that for the consumer, we're going to be in a great place.
And you mentioned Diageo, and you guys are a branded content powerhouse. You won our top branded content views in 2017 leaderboard by a margin of 700 million views. Tell us about that. Tell us about branded content, what you're doing, and what BuzzFeed's goals are in that space.
Yeah, when we think about content, we try not to separate brand and content, and that is helpful. And so the constructs of what native advertising actually ends up being is what we are working on and working towards. Last year, I had the pleasure of working with Jonathan Stewart from Omnicom, one of the luminaries in our business. He's an awesome guy. And we did a study on defining what native advertising is. And what was so awesome about that study is, when we think about that, the definition is, the format looks the same as the content that you're serving on a page. And we started with that as a foundation. And what was so funny is we literally went out, and it was a consumer study as well as it is an advertising study, and asked advertisers that were director level and above, people like us who should know what native advertising is. And I asked them 2 questions, 300 of them. We said, do you know what native advertising is? And if you say yes, tell us what it is in this text box. And so of these 300 people, we worked with Advertiser Perceptions. Out of 5, 1 person would say, I actually don't know what it is. Out of the 4, we said, okay, here's the text box. Tell us what you think it is. When we got back the data and we were sorting through it, about 38%, if I recall, I might be off by a little bit, but 38% of the responses literally were exactly the same, exactly word for word. And of course, I got on the phone with Advertiser Perceptions, and I was like, yo, guys, somebody in this panel gamed the system and is now probably making $100 in honorarium in taking the survey 38, 40, 80 times. What's going on here? And what we noticed after they did a lot of digging was people were literally going on Google, doing a search for native advertising, cutting and pasting exactly what it was. And the fact is, we don't even know what it is. We needed a search engine to make sure we look smart or we're consistent. And it started to teach me that there's a lot of white space for us to start to really think about, well, what does that actually mean? And how do we talk about that as marketers? And, anyone in here like architecture? We all know who Frank Lloyd Wright is. And, whenever I say, oh, has anyone ever talked about, or heard the phrase form following function? About 70 to 80% of the people are like, yeah, of course, we've all heard of that. Well, Frank Lloyd Wright actually wrote a positioning piece that said he detested this notion of form following function or function following form. There's no following at all. He said form and function need to work together. And so we use that as our inspiration point to talk about native because we are stuck as an industry talking about this notion of the form when content really plays a function in our lives. And that function is about inspiring, connecting, being real, and acting as such. Whereas advertising, in a lot of ways, isn't that at all. And so it's manufactured. It's not true connection. And so when you talk about the reason why we do think we have this lead, when we think about the tasty videos that we put out there, the 3 things that we found in our research is that it has to be accessible, it has to be discoverable and inspiring. And the accessibility piece is the most important because it allows a consumer to say, I can do that. That's so us. And as a result of that, it doesn't matter if it's Diageo because Diageo just ends up creating that sort of connection for the consumer who wants to have an amazing Super Bowl party. They just happen to be the one that is a part of that journey. And so we're not saying that we've cracked the code because we're still learning too. And I think the consumer habits are changing, but our ability to sort of stay ahead there and study why this is happening and really create those definitions for us as well as for advertisers is how we're thinking about branded content and how we hope that it actually starts to mature in the marketplace.
That was a deep response. I'm going to remember that form and function. That was awesome. What do you think is the role of 300-person surveys or qualitative surveys or panel-based surveys in a world of big data, in a world where, like Tubular's tracking 4 billion videos and audience affinities off of that? Like, what is the role of those 2 things in this space?
You can extract a lot of the what in measurement tools and a little bit of the why too. I mean, I think the data actually allows for that. One thing I still really think that surveys get you is still a lot more of the why. When I was doing a speaking engagement just on Tuesday, someone was talking about qual and true in-depth ethnography. I think one of the things that we do to each other is we essentially tear each other down and say, oh, this methodology no longer works, or this sort of data set is better than this other data set. And I actually think that's not true at all. I love being able to pair what you guys do, what Quantcast and ComScore and Nielsen does, and look at primary research, look at our own analytics platforms. At the end of the day, what makes all of us special is we're the best storytellers in the world because we can back it up. And the backup is just what comes from the numbers. And those numbers sometimes are softer because of survey or they're really soft because it's qual, but the qual ends up creating the insight that allows me to dig much deeper in measurement tools that make me go, wow, that's amazing. And a really good insight is the whole at conversation that we were talking about earlier. It didn't happen by us looking at sentiment tools analysis. We were literally just looking at a couple of comments of a video, and then my friends and I started talking, the research group, and going, well, why do you think you at somebody? And that conversation, which is qualitative in nature, made us go, we should really go look into this and use Crimson Hexagon and figure out what this means. And so even these office conversations that allow us to pontificate and have fun, they end up being pretty cool projects because we can tell new stories with that data.
Great. Are there any other, I think time is up, but are there any other questions? I feel like we started late, so we can steal a few extra minutes at the end here. No questions? Okay.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you.